All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are going deep, deep, deep into the world of Donald Trump.
Oh, wow.
We're going to be looking at his journey from businessman to reality TV star to, you know it, President of the United States.
The man wears many hats.
He does. He does. And we're basing all of this on information from his Wikipedia page.
That's a good source. Very comprehensive.
Yeah. And his life, full of twists and turns, ups and downs.
Yeah, more than you might think.
Oh, yeah. Some of the details are pretty surprising.
Some might say shocking even.
Oh, yeah. I would agree with that, for example. Did you know that 6 of Trump's businesses actually filed for bankruptcy?
Really?
Yeah.
6?
6, Chapter 11.
Huh. Well, that makes you think about that whole business genius image.
It does, right?
It really does.
All right, so let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
Early life, the family real estate business.
Okay. So Trump's story, it all begins in the world of real estate.
Uh-huh.
Working for his dad's company, Trump Management.
Okay, so he didn't start from nothing.
Not exactly, no. But
And they focused on middle-class rental properties in New York City, right?
that's right. Mainly in Brooklyn and Queens.
Okay, and now I was reading something about this, and didn't those early real estate dealings involve some issues?
You're talking about the allegations of discriminatory housing practices?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's true. The company was actually accused of some pretty serious stuff back in the 1970s.
And this is something that's followed Trump throughout his career.
Oh, absolutely. Those accusations have never really gone away.
So that's a pretty serious shadow hanging over everything.
You could say that.
So then Trump takes over the family business, right?
Right?
Rebrands it as the Trump Organization
Yes.
and shifts focus to, those Manhattan skyscrapers, all the glitzy, high-profile projects.
Exactly. That's when he really started to build his brand.
The Trump brand, yeah. But then there's this string of bankruptcies.
Yeah, that's the other side of the coin.
How does that square with the whole successful businessman story?
Well, that's the thing about Trump. He's full of contradictions.
It's like he was crafting an image even way back then.
It's possible. He's always been very image conscious.
Speaking of image, we got to talk about his jump into media.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other chapter.
Because his ghost-written books, like The Art of the Deal.
Which was largely written by Tony Schwartz, by the way.
Right, played a big role in shaping his public image.
It presented this, larger-than-life persona.
And then there's The Apprentice.
Oh, yeah, don't forget The Apprentice.
So Boardroom.
The catchphrase,
Iconic.
"You're fired."
It became a cultural phenomenon.
It really did.
And I think that's where he really honed that ability to, command attention and control the narrative.
He became a master showman.
It was like a training ground for his political ambitions.
In a way, yeah.
And speaking of politics, his early forays, like that little flirtation with a presidential run in 2012.
Right.
A lot of people dismiss that as a publicity stunt.
It's hard to argue with that assessment.
But then 2016, he jumps into the race and bam, wins.
Yeah, that shocked a lot of people, especially the political analysts.
Big time.
They never saw it coming.
His 2016 campaign defied all expectations, really.
It did.
He went against the grain, relying on those massive rallies and...
Constant stream of tweets.
Oh, yeah, and a populist message that resonated with, I guess you could say, a certain segment of the population.
A segment that felt unheard and ignored by the establishment.
And he wasn't afraid to break the rules of conventional politics.
No, he definitely wasn't.
Now, we can't overlook the sheer number of false or misleading statements he made during the campaign.
Yeah, that became, unfortunately, a hallmark of his political career.
A pattern that, sadly, continued throughout his presidency.
It did, and it's something we'll definitely be exploring further in our deep dive.
So I think it's safe to say his presidency was defined by controversy, wouldn't you?
Oh, without a doubt.
From day one, his actions sparked debates and protests.
Both within the United States and around the world.
All right, let's dive into some of the really controversial stuff.
Let's do it.
Starting with the travel ban.
Okay, so the travel ban, it targeted citizens from several Muslim-majority countries.
Right.
And that immediately triggered protests.
Yeah, and a whole bunch of legal challenges.
People saw it as discriminatory, a betrayal of American values.
Then there was the border wall, a central promise of his campaign.
Ah, yes, the wall.
The wall on the U.S.-Mexico border.
Became a symbol of his hardline stance on immigration.
He even diverted billions of dollars from military budgets to fund its construction.
That caused quite a stir, a lot of controversy around that move.
And then there's the zero-tolerance policy at the border.
That was a tough one.
Those images of families being separated were just heartbreaking.
Yeah, it resulted in thousands of children being separated from their parents.
And that was widely condemned as just Cruel, inhumane.
There was intense pressure to reverse course.
And, on the global stage,
Yeah.
Trump made some bold moves, like pulling out of the Paris Agreement on climate change.
That was a big one. A landmark accord aimed at combating climate change.
Drew a lot of criticism from world leaders and environmental activists.
They saw it as a step backwards, a rejection of science.
Yeah, and a signal that America was no longer a leader in the fight against climate change.
He also, of course, made some significant appointments to the Supreme Court.
Oh, yeah, can't forget about that.
3 conservative justices, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett.
Shaping the ideological balance of the court.
For a generation to come, probably.
Okay, let's talk about COVID-19.
A very turbulent time.
His response to the pandemic was, well, inconsistent, to say the least.
He downplayed the virus's severity, resisted public health measures.
Like mask wearing, social distancing.
Right. He often contradicted his own health officials.
Promoted unproven treatments.
Even halted funding to the World Health Organization.
A lot of people saw that as an attempt to deflect blame.
And undermine a crucial international body.
Especially at a time when global cooperation was so important.
Couldn't have come at a worse time.
So his presidency, a roller coaster, right? Of controversy and unpredictable actions.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, we've got a lot more ground to cover.
In part 2, we'll dig into those impeachment proceedings, his claims of election fraud, and, of course, the events leading up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
It's going to be a fascinating and somewhat unsettling journey.
Buckle up.
It's going to be a bumpy ride. Welcome back to the deep dive into the world of Donald Trump.
It's wild to think about how a guy, who built his career on showing off wealth and success could connect so deeply with voters who felt like, left out of that success.
That's a great observation. It's really interesting how he was able to tap into that sense of economic anxiety and resentment.
Yeah, they saw him as a symbol of the system they felt excluded from.
But they also believe he was the one to dismantle it for them.
It's paradoxical, right?
It really is. He was this ultimate insider, a billionaire who benefited from the system.
Yeah, he presented himself as an outsider, a disruptor.
And people bought it.
They were hungry for change. They wanted someone to shake things up.
And he definitely did that.
He tapped into a very specific cultural anxiety.
Especially among white working-class voters who felt left behind by globalization, by social change.
And his rhetoric often played on those fears.
Sometimes scapegoating immigrants, minorities, even other countries for America's problems.
It's a tactic as old as time, really.
But Trump used it very effectively in the age of social media.
Social media gave him a direct line to his supporters.
He could bypass the traditional media, control the message,
build his own echo chamber,
where his claims, no matter how outlandish, were often taken as gospel.
Which brings us back to that issue of truth and falsehoods.
It's a theme that runs throughout his entire career, really.
One of the most concerning aspects of Trump's presidency
was his blatant disregard for factual accuracy.
He just made thousands of false or misleading statements.
About everything, you name it. The size of his inauguration crowd, the seriousness of the pandemic.
And he would just attack anyone who challenged him.
Fake news. Enemy of the people.
It was this relentless assault on the very concept of objective truth.
And it's had a corrosive effect on our public discourse.
It's dangerous for democracy, a democracy that relies on informed citizens.
People need to be able to make reasoned judgments based on facts.
But when truth itself becomes subjective, open to interpretation,
it's hard to have productive debates, hold leaders accountable.
It creates this breeding ground for conspiracy theories and misinformation.
And we saw this play out in real time during the pandemic.
Yeah, he downplayed the virus, promoted unproven treatments.
Some of his supporters ended up rejecting public health guidelines, questioning the science behind vaccines.
It's a scary example of the power of disinformation.
Especially when it's coming from someone in a position of authority.
So what happens now? Where do we go from here? It feels like we're in uncharted territory.
It's a time that calls for vigilance.
Critical thinking.
A renewed commitment to truth and evidence.
We have to be willing to engage in respectful dialogue.
Even with people we disagree with.
And some serious introspection.
Yeah, we need to ask ourselves some tough questions.
What allowed someone like Trump to rise to power in the first place?
What vulnerabilities in our society, our political system, did he exploit?
We need to find some answers if we want to prevent this from happening again.
We need to have these conversations across political divides.
Find common ground, work together to strengthen our democracy.
It's a tall order. but the stakes are incredibly high.
We've seen how fragile democracy can be.
We can't afford to take it for granted.
We have to be willing to defend it against those who would undermine it.
And that brings us to the events of January 6th.
The attack on the Capitol.
A shocking and traumatic event for so many Americans.
A direct assault on the peaceful transfer of power.
One of the most fundamental principles of democratic governance.
It showed how dangerous political extremism can be.
The willingness of some to use violence to get what they want.
Trump's role in inciting the violence is undeniable.
Remember his words at the rally that day?
Fight like hell.
He urged his supporters to march on the Capitol.
And those words had a huge impact.
Even as the violence unfolded, he was slow to condemn it.
Almost as if he approved of it.
A complete dereliction of duty.
A betrayal of his oath to uphold the Constitution.
The events of January 6th left a deep wound on American democracy.
It raised serious questions about the strength of our institutions.
About the future of American politics.
And it highlighted the need for accountability.
Those who took part in the violence, those who encouraged it.
They need to be held responsible.
And we need a national reckoning.
With the forces that led to this dark moment in our history.
It's going to take honesty,
courage,
and a willingness to confront some really uncomfortable truths.
But it's essential if we want to heal the division.
And to make sure that something like January 6th never happens again.
So the big question, how do we move forward?
How do we rebuild trust in our institutions?
Bridge the partisan divide.
Reaffirm our commitment to those core democratic principles.
It's not going to be easy.
But we have to try.
We owe it to ourselves, to future generations.
We need to find ways to have productive conversations.
About our differences.
Engage in respectful debate.
Find common ground.
And hold our leaders accountable.
No matter their political party.
We have to be vigilant against disinformation.
Against the erosion of truth.
The future of American democracy depends on it.
That's a powerful thought.
And in our final part, we'll dig a little deeper into some of those lingering questions.
About the Trump era.
And consider what we can learn from it all.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Donald Trump.
It's kind of amazing how his presidency, really shook things up.
It was nonstop controversy, right?
Constant.
Always pushing the limits.
Yeah, he thrived on the chaos.
It's like he was more focused on winning, in the moment than actually governing.
Oh, absolutely. It was all about disruption, rejecting the norms.
And it worked. People were tired of the establishment.
They wanted change.
Even if it meant, instability.
Well, that's the thing, right? There were downsides to that approach.
Oh, yeah, lots of impulsive decisions.
Policy reversals, no clear direction.
Instability at home, uncertainty abroad.
Our allies were confused. Our adversaries saw opportunity.
And his foreign policy.
Oh, yeah.
America first.
Yeah, it put him at odds with our allies.
It was transactional,
With drawing from agreements, imposing tariffs.
Cozying up to authoritarian leaders.
Not exactly a recipe for global stability.
So what did we learn? Where do we go from here?
Big questions.
America is at a crossroads.
Are facing some serious challenges.
Climate change, economic inequality.
The rise of authoritarianism around the world.
And the Trump era, it's left a mark.
It did.
Deepened divisions, raised questions about democracy.
It's a time for reflection.
Yeah. Who are we as a nation? Where do we want to go?
But it's also a time for action.
We have to bridge those divides, rebuild trust.
And reaffirm our commitment to those democratic principles.
And we have to do all of that with a clear understanding of how we got here.
Learn from the mistakes of the past.
Build a better future.
More just, more equitable, more sustainable.
It's a lot.
It is.
But we can't give up.
We can't.
It starts with each of us being informed,
engaged,
standing up for what we believe in,
holding our leaders accountable,
demanding transparency and integrity,
rejecting those who divide us.
And remember, democracy, it's not a spectator sport.
You have to participate.
Listen to different viewpoints. Find common ground.
Our deep dive into Donald Trump, it's been quite a journey.
Significant events, big debates.
And the story's still unfolding.
But it teaches us about power, truth, and the fragility of democracy.
Valuable lessons for all of us.
Think about your own role in shaping the future.
For yourself, for your children, for generations to come.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.
Keep exploring these important issues. Engage in those crucial conversations.
Because that's how we keep democracy alive and well.